Welcome to the Jones Zone, a podcast by Darryl and JJ Jones.
Hope you're going to like this video. We got a bunch of videos in our video bank, everything to do with real estate. So hope you're going to like it. If you do, subscribe for more and check out some other videos.
Welcome, everybody. Today's guest is Don Sharp. He does what's called natural hazards disclosures. I was talking to Don prior to our show here today about how when I first got into business in 1990, contracts were one page. It was one page. People, you'd handwrite in the price, the escrow, the deposit, and I don't even know what else. Well, now they're around 17 pages whenever you write up a contract or an offer for a property. And we were joking about how oftentimes each one of those paragraphs that are in the new offers are basically of the result of a lawsuit that had happened previously. So they cover it to try to avoid lawsuits, which is obviously a good thing. So one thing that they have is what's called a natural hazards report. And it tells people, in fact, you know what, Don, I'm going to let you tell the audience, what is a natural hazards report and also how it started. I know it's required in all of our real estate transactions that we do here in California, but tell us a little bit more what that is, the history of it, whatever you want to say.
A natural hazard disclosure report is what I sell, provides one of the statutory documents that most properties in California have to have, and that's the natural hazard disclosure statement. As a matter of fact, it's only one of two statutory forms to close the transactions. I know you talked about a 17-page contract, but you realize that you don't really have to have a contract, the RPA from CAR to sell a house. You don't have to have title insurance. You don't have to have a lot of things. I would make sure that you had them no matter what. But required by law and what you should do, standards like CAR provides you, are two different things. So what the NHDS does, it's part of
Natural Hazards Disclosure, NHDS.
Yeah, the Natural Hazard Disclosure Statement, and it goes along with the Transfer Disclosure Statement. Those are the two statutory documents that most transactions in California real estate must have. So they always go hand in hand. So if it requires a TDS, it always requires the NHDS.
So TDS, transfer disclosure, that's basically a document that a seller fills out, a very brief description of what it is. So there's more to it than this. But basically, I always tell sellers, look, it's legal to sell a house. You can have cement in your plumbing. You can have all your electrical wires pulled out. It's legal to sell it like that, but as long as you disclose it. So we have a thing called a transfer disclosure, which disclosures any faults or perceived faults or anything that's wrong, quote unquote, wrong with a house. So my point is, I just want to educate the audience because sometimes they won't know what the word TDS or the acronym TDS is, et cetera. So this has to do with natural hazards.
So the statement is part of the report. And also part of the report is the explanations of what's on there. So it basically tells the potential buyer is being disclosed to by the seller. Are you in a flood zone? Are you in a fire zone? Are you in a wildland fire zone? Are you in an earthquake zone? Are you in a seismic area like liquefaction or landslide? So that's what the statement does. And then the rest of the report gives a lot of other information that sellers have to provide to buyers for their fiduciary, like our Megan's Law, which talks about certain people that live in your neighborhood, like pedophiles, things like that. We have to provide a link in California to them, right? Doesn't have to be on a specific form or anything, but we have to provide it. Natural gas line. So anything that a seller needs to disclose to a buyer pretty much is what's in a natural hazard disclosure report in a whole, right? But the statement is what we provide, and we can do that in about a minute. Whereas if you are doing this on your own, it could take you 2 or 3 days, and then there's no guarantee that the information that's on that statement is correct or not. And so that's what the natural hazard disclosure reporting companies, they provide the report super fast, and they also back it up with a guarantee that if they do make a mistake, it's not so much a guarantee, but it's their terms and conditions say, if we make a mistake, we'll make you whole. And that's standard throughout the industry.
Well, it's basically the state of California is sliced up, for lack of a better term, mapped out to where it shows. Let's go over actually all those different things that it shows. So you mentioned, for example, flood zone. Can you tell us what is a flood zone?
Well, if you're in a FEMA flood zone, obviously that's what it's going to report on that statutory document. So if FEMA says you're in one of these zones, A or Z, you're going to you need to know that before you buy the house. And again, the genesis of this whole report, you have to understand, it's wasn't a brand new report back in the 90s when this first thing came out. It's a culmination of laws over since the early 1900s, and the very first one was in the early 1900s, was called dam inundation. That's if you live in a zone where if a dam breaks, you could be flooded out, and that was out as a result of a Northern California dam that breached, and it flooded out an entire community. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in Texas now, where there was floods, basically that's what happened up there, was an entire community that flooded out. So state of California says, we're going to pass a law, and we're going to make sure that people know, if they buy here, they understand that a dam could break and they could be in peril if it does.
Basically protects the seller somewhat, and also protects the buyer, alerts the buyer at least,
right,
to that.
Same with the flood zone. We want to make sure you understand that you are in a 100-year flood zone plan, just to be aware that not only could you have a flood, but there might be the potential of having to buy flood insurance based on the financing you have, because most banks are going to require you to have flood insurance if you're in one of these two zones. Now, it doesn't include state and local responsibility areas, but this is for FEMA specifically.
Is there a flood zone? And I don't know how well you have this memorized, so if you don't have the answer, it's no big deal. But I deal mostly in Orange County, LA County, San Bernardino, and Riverside County. In Orange County, even more so than the others. Orange County, I think they do have a 100-year flood, if I remember correctly. Are there any major flood zones in Orange County?
Yeah, there are a couple, and it's everything that we do now. You have to understand is parcel specific. We don't really care about structures on houses. We worry about the parcels themselves, and so there are a few areas where there are some flood zones.
Probably behind dams, or I know the Brea Dam, which is so funny.
You have tsunami zones out there as well, but that doesn't really qualify as the 100-year A and V areas.
It's interesting because the city of Brea now is building behind. I don't even know if it's called the Brea Dam, but there's a dam, and it was always thought of for the last 40, 50 years. Well, they're never going to build houses there because it's right behind a dam. And I don't know how the heck they got away with it, but all of a sudden now they have plans to build houses all there. There used to be a Christmas tree farm there. In any event, sorry, may I go off the topic here a little bit? But so what else? So you got flood zones.
Well, right after that is you say that, because the next one in line is the potential flooding, and when the area of potential flooding is called dam inundation, and that's when you're in that area we talked about earlier, where if you're in one of these areas in a dam breach, there's a potential that your property could be flooded.
There's the fire zones. That's a big deal right now.
And there's two different ones, and almost all the time you're either one or the other. You're hardly ever in both. And one is a very high fire severity zone, and then second one is a wildland area. That wildland fire zone is what they call it, and that's usually up in the mountains like Big Bear, Arrowhead, Santa Rosa Plateau, right to the east of Orange County. Those are the wildland areas where basically CAL FIRE or the Forestry Service will be taking care of the firefighting duties there, not the local responsibility.
And then the high fire zone, those are typical, and this is actually a question, those are typically up above kind of the mountains, wherever there's a lot of hills, or is that fair to say, or not necessarily?
I think probably 5 years ago it was fair to say that, but anymore now with the passing of the new laws, the fire laws, the reporting laws, AB 38, SB 63, which is a California-specific two laws, right, passed by state legislation and went into effect in 2021. And anymore now, most of the state of California the majority of the state is either in a high, very high, or a moderate fire zone.
And what's that mean? So I guess, it sounds pretty obvious. It just means that it's more likely than other areas to catch fire.
Yeah, that's really what it is.
Does the insurance have a different diagram or boundaries for their fire zones, or do they rely on your guys', the ones that you guys have? And are the ones that you have, that's considered the state, meaning it's not specific just to your company?
The insurance companies and all natural hazard disclosure companies get their data from the same places. And that's the general plan from the state, the city, the county, et cetera, where the parcel's located. And we use the same exact maps. We just use them for different reasons, right? Natural hazard disclosure companies use maps to determine whether you're in or out of one of these particular hazards. And that's all we care about. We don't care about your structure. We don't care about past incidents at the area. We take from the general plan, are you in or out of one of these zones? And that's all we care about. Insurance companies use that same information to determine premium. And so their methods of, the way that they use that data and the way we use that data are totally separate, because we get that a lot. Hey, Don, you must be wrong. The insurance company is not, they're charging me way much more because they say I'm in a high fire zone, but your report says I'm not. Well, again, their determinations are different than mine. I can tell you you're either in or you're out, and that's all I know.
What are the other natural hazard zones?
Sure.
You got flood.
You live in
fire.
California. Flood, potential flood, which is dam inundation, right? Wildland fire, high fire severity zone, which is two different things. Earthquake, obviously. You live in California, you got to have earthquake, right?
Yeah. Is there any place that's not in an earthquake?
It's funny you say that. There's probably a lot more areas that are not in earthquake zones than are. But
Interesting.
California, we're world famous for earthquakes. We're getting more famous for the fires we have every year, obviously. But earthquakes are very few.
Proximity to. So maybe you're not in one, but hey, there's one 30 miles away. In fact, right, something like that.
Well, it's all based on the parcel, right? And then there's certain rules that certain counties have and that have. Are you in or out of one of these zones based on their local rules and regulations? Yeah.
What causes one to be in a zone and not? Is it just simply the proximity to a fault line?
There's a lot of considerations. Past, it has a lot to do with it. The proximity to a fault zone, and those are considerations that the state will make. Say, yeah, you know what? There's a good possibility that there's going to be an earthquake in this zone.
Well, of course, I've been hearing for 30 years that there's a 99% chance of having a massive earthquake in California. Now, I think it's been 29 years that I've been hearing that. Now, what are the other disclosures?
The last one on the state requirement ones are the seismic areas, which is called a seismic hazard area, but it takes two different disclosures. One is liquefaction, which is basically small molecules of water that's embedded in the sediment of your property, right? And if there's a major earthquake or seismic event, it could shift your foundation. And so it's a fancy word. Liquefaction is a fancy word saying you got some water deposits in your soil, very small, okay, obviously, but it's there. And if there's a major earthquake, seismic event, it could shift your foundation. And the other one is landslide. And that's all covered in that one seismic hazard zone because it has to do with both. Same kind of deal. If there's a major seismic event and you're on a coastline, there's a good chance that you might fall in. And that's
where it's normally at. The liquefaction, it's called.
Liquefaction and landslide are all part of the seismic hazard requirements that are on the statement.
And the closer you get to the coastline, the more likely it's in that zone. Is a brief, fair thing to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, the closer you are to a hillside, probably more than anything else, more than it's not so much a coastline as it is a hillside, because there's a lot of landslide zones that are inland, but they're up on a hill. And that if there's a major rainfall or a seismic event to go with that, your property could slide down the mountain.
And that's the landslide. Is liquefaction different from landslide?
That's correct. Yeah. Like I said, liquefaction is all based on that. Liquefaction could be anywhere. It could be on a flat piece of 300 acres, but it could have that like I said, that small water molecule that's kind of embedded in the soil. I'm kind of breaking it down, making it layman's terms, but that's basically what it is. Think about it: small molecules of water in between a bunch of sand that you just can't get rid of. You can't compact it enough to make that go away. Although the state of California, their building codes are very, very good. So I don't really, I tell people, if you like the house, don't worry about that part of it. If you're in one of these liquefaction zones, it's just for you to be aware, because buyer needs to be aware of what they're purchasing, that this could happen.
It just simply means it would be more likely in that type of zone that you would have a problem with your foundation if there was a major earthquake rather than not being in one.
Right. And I'll say this, and again, I'm not an expert at this, but personally, with the building codes in California and owning business that had to build on this kind of stuff, the earthquake that would cause your foundation to slip is probably going to do a lot more damage to your house than the shifting of the foundation.
What's the history of this disclosure? I kind of started off with that. We were talking before the show started too about what kind of generated this. Well, now it's standard protocol.
It is a state of California, first of all, specific report / statement No other no other state in the union has a requirement like we do in California. So Arizona has kind of a few laws that they have to disclose, but it's not as involved as ours. And a lot of other states have different disclosures. And this is what this is. It's a culmination over years and years and years of, like you said, Darryl, lawsuits. Lawsuits create new laws and requirements, right? That's what it is. So it started off, honestly, it's like I told you earlier, we talked about the dam inundation. A town in Northern California flooded out. State of California legislature says seller needs to tell buyer about this, that you're in one of these zones. Then, of course, earthquake, fire, all these were laws that are put in place that seller must disclose to buyer so that the buyer can do their own due diligence before they buy the house. They know the dangers and the risks of living where they're living. And then in 76, I believe it was, I'm almost positive it was, there's a fella up north, his name was J.C. Pendergrass, and he was a retiring geologist and said, you know what, I think that I could build a report and sell it to realtors and their sellers to satisfy these disclosure requirements as a way to make their life easier. So that's what he did. He built a company, and it's still alive today up in Northern California and throughout the state, actually, if you want to buy it. For a long time, he was the only person doing that. And then it kind of caught some steam. And, realtors, you know what? Honestly, and it's a great idea. If you have a product or a service that can help you get from A to B and so you can get on to your next listing, it was a great idea. So it started to catch on. It was the fad of the time back in the late 70s and early 80s. And then starting in the early 90s, more folks started to get into it. And probably by 1994, there's probably half a dozen or more companies that were providing that same service. And then in 1994, there was a huge earthquake in Northridge, California, which killed over 100 people and caused billions and billions and billions of dollars of damage that the state of California, unfortunately, had to eat a lot of it because a lot of the insurance companies bailed out. And the Department of Insurance almost went bankrupt because of it in California. And part of the reason why is because a lot of the buyers who bought in that area claimed that they didn't realize that they were in an earthquake zone. And so what ended up happening is they said, well, we need to make sure that every buyer in the state of California, with a few exceptions, and there are some, and they're just so few that it's not worth mentioning here, properties in California, whether it be commercial or residential, must have this statement. And that's what happened in 1998. Civil Code 1103 was enacted that said these properties must have this statement signed by the buyer to know that, and well, they have to show proof that the buyer was given this statement. Signatures are usually requested and ideal for this situation so that the buyer is aware of the hazards that are there and that the seller has done their due diligence as well and their fiduciary duty to making sure it was there. So that came into law in 1998. And that's about the time when the industry went from about 8 companies to now, since it's required by law, I think there's over 45 companies now that sell the report in the state of California.
It's a booklet, and it just goes through. It's kind of an interesting booklet. If anybody wants one, chime in on the remarks or contact me, and I'll get you one because it'll tell you more details of what each thing is, the liquefaction or liquefaction. What's it called?
Yeah, it's liquefaction. That's the statement part of it. And the report itself does a lot of different things. In the state of California, realtors and sellers do have other fiduciary duties. Like I was saying earlier, Megan's Law is one of them. We put that in our report to make it easier for you. The gas line, pipe location, and valves. It's just a link, but we provide that. Are you in or out of a Mello-Roos, which is, again, a state of California specific tax? It's required by law now that the seller tell buyer, are you in or out of a Mello-Roos?
Let me ask you this real quick, since you're talking about Mello-Roos. The state, when the word gets out about Mello-Roos and it becomes a bad word and nobody wants Mello-Roos, and then they just change the name. They have a new name for it. They're calling it something else. Is that in your report now too?
It's really the same thing. They're calling
it
different, but if there is a tax assessment on a property, you as a seller, you must provide that information.
But is it
in your law says Mello-Roos, but
right.
They're trying to skirt it by doing it that way.
Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe for more.